I think just about everyone has read a Dr Seuss book, the likes of The Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, The Grinch, Horton, Here's a Who, Fox in the Socks, Hop on Pop. Dr Seuss was Theodore Seuss Geisel. He was an American children's author, political cartoonist, an illustrator, a poet, an animator, a screenwriter and a filmmaker. He wrote and illustrated more than 60 books under his pen name, and those books have sold more than 600 million copies around the world. Dr Seuss died in September 1991 at the age of 87. A few years ago, his widow Audrey was cleaning out his studio and found a box containing a manuscript and sketches for a book entitled Horse Museum. The book's central character is a horse who guides a group of children through a museum, reproducing depictions of horses in works by major artists like Picasso and Monet. There was no date on the sketches, but they believed to have been drawn in the early 1950s. 18 months ago, Dr Seuss's publishers contacted an Australian artist called Andrew Joyner. Swearing him to secrecy, they asked if he'd like to illustrate the newly discovered book. And last week, Andrew, his wife and children, the week before last, travelled to the US for the global launch of Dr Seuss's Horse Museum. This is an amazing story, and Andrew Joyner joins me now from Adelaide. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening, Alan. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it is astonishing. If I've just, on this camera over here, I think this is the book, I have to tell you, and then I'll just show you what has happened is, well, Andrew has, these are his illustrations, but the horse pictures are horses of some of the great artists, for example, that kind of thing there, and underneath it, there are the illustrations by Andrew. Now, Andrew, how early in life did you discover books like this?
Well, the books of Dr Seuss I can always remember reading, but I was really fascinated by artists when I was young. I remember I loved encyclopedias about artists and things like that. So, yeah, it seemed a neat joining of those two childhood enthusiasms. This book with my love of Dr Seuss.
I agree. You made the very valid point you said about the books. They're timeless, they never seem to age. I mean, Green Eggs and Ham came out nearly 60 years ago, and everyone's still reading it today.
Yeah. There's like a really... I mean, his world is so unique, I think, that he's created. I think that's partly why it's timeless. It's also... There's a real charm to his work that I think appeals to all ages and for all times. And there's something about his imagination that sort of seems to leap out of the moment into, you know, just directly towards the reader, I think.
It's fantastic. But the illustrations, now, tell us how you then got involved. I mean, who approached you about illustrating Dr Seuss's Horse Museum?
Well, the first person I heard from was a woman called Kathy Goldsmith, who actually worked with Dr Seuss when she was alive, and she works at Random House in America. And her first contact was just asking me to sign a non-disclosure agreement before I saw what the job was. And then it came through and I was just amazed. I couldn't believe that it was this unpublished manuscript by Dr Seuss and that they were interested in me illustrating it.
Now, but what about the secrecy bit? You were sworn then to secrecy.
Yes, I was. And, that was... I liked being sworn to secrecy, I've got to say, because it sort of took the pressure off a little bit. I could just keep the project to myself and work on it in private and in secret. And because if I thought too much about how significant the book was, I think I would have found it harder to do.
But when you saw when you saw the manuscript, and the sketches, what went through your mind when you looked at them?
Well, firstly, I was astonished to be looking at actual, unpublished, unseen sketches by Dr Seuss.
Yes.
But I just really loved the idea of the book, that idea of, explaining art to children by looking at the way different artists have painted horses. And I thought, well, I mean, that appealed to me anyway, and I thought it did deserve to become a book, so I was kind of really excited that I would be able to contribute to that.
How did you go, though, about bringing... Because it's a wonderful story. It's called Horse Museum, and it's a story always about the history of horses. It's wonderful stuff. But then you've got this challenge of bringing that narrative to life. Look at this. They're marvellous, aren't they? And how do you go about that in your head?
Well, what I really want to do you're right. I did want to find a way of putting a story into it because it's a non-fiction book, but I think it needed some kind of story element to draw readers through the book. And I kind of latched onto this idea of making a horse sort of a character that guides you through the book and through the museum itself. And once I drew that character, it all sort of seemed to fall into place, and it helped give me a real sense of there being characters in the book and a bit of a different cast.
I'll just go to the screen here. You see that picture that I'm now showing you now. If we can zoom up on that, can we? This is you'll notice the picture is by Charles Verlat, and it's called Horses Straining at a Load. Now, what prompted you to illustrate that in the way you did, with a very strong animal on the other side of the page?
Well, I really wanted to get some Seuss characters into the book, and that's my sneaky reference. I snuck Horton into the book, and I thought it's perfect because I wanted it to be a bit of a tribute to Dr Seuss as well. And so, yeah, I snuck Horton in there, and I thought that's a perfect place for him to be, you know. And I also kind of like the idea of showing children how the meaning of the work through the illustration. So showing strength through my own illustrations as well.
That's fantastic. Absolutely. Now, how long did all of this take? And, I mean, did you feel under pressure?
It took me about 6 months. You know, I'm really surprised. To be honest, it wasn't as high pressure as I thought it might be. I worked with a really small group of, like, only 2 or 3 people at Random House. And again, it was, you know, kind of in secret. So, yeah, it just all seemed to come together quite nicely. I don't know why. Some things, sometimes the work sort of flows quite well and sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I'm very glad that it did.
But you say at the back of the book, you did all of your drawings with an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil.
I did, yes, yeah. Well, I actually really love drawing on the iPad. I know it probably doesn't look like I've drawn on an iPad at all. And I kind of put a bit of effort into making it look like something on paper and things like that. But the cool thing about the iPad is I can go from, like, my very first sketch to the final illustration, all sort of in the one space.
See, the thing about it, it's all very well. I mean, it is a storybook, but there's a serious note here, isn't there? It's also a history book. People can enjoy the story and the history of horses.
Yeah, I think the editors did a great job of... there's quite a bit of layers of information in there. There's notes about the artworks at the back and there's essay about the creation of the book. But I think in that sense, you know, anyone can really dip into the book and get a really good understanding of some element of art, I think.
Amazing. You're amazing. What's the next project?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I'm sort of beginning on a few other things at the moment. I'm finishing off a book. I've got a new one coming out. Oh, I've just done one that's just come out, which is called Boo, a little baby book by a very famous Australian author called Margaret Wilde. I've got another one coming called Ask Hercules Quick, which is by Ursula de Bazarski, who I've worked with on lots of books. And that's out a little bit.
Very, very, very talented. I mean, Australia is full of people with talent. Here's one, Andrew Joyner. There's the book. It's absolutely fantastic. Everyone will love it. The kid, look, Dr Seuss's Horse Museum.